Predestination. 2014. Movie synopsis by Zillur Movies Recapped. The movie begins with a temporal agent making an attempt to apprehend a notorious terrorist often called the Fizzle Bomber, who planted a bomb in a constructing, making an attempt to kill lots of individuals. The agent succeeds in containing the bomb, however is severely injured when his face is partially uncovered to the ensuing explosion. The Fizzle Bomber manages to flee and the temporal agent returns to his timeline, sooner or later, utilizing a coordinate transformer subject equipment, a time machine, with the assistance of an unknown individual. Returning to the longer term, in 1992, the agent awakens to seek out that he has undergone facial surgical procedure to avoid wasting his life. Docs grafted on new pores and skin and reconstructed the agent's face and throat as they have been badly broken. It's revealed throughout this time that the agent works for a mysterious group, often called the Temporal Bureau, that sends temporal brokers by time to stop main crimes that might price the lives of hundreds of individuals, and that the Fizzle Bomber is the one legal to elude them to this point. The Fizzle Bomber can also be chargeable for killing 11,000 individuals in New York in March 1975. As soon as the agent is healed, he's ordered to embark on a closing mission earlier than he's decommissioned from the company. The agent accepts the mission, makes use of his coordinate transformer subject equipment, which is disguised as a violin case, to journey again in time to 1970, and works as a bartender in New York. The bartender seemingly awaits the arrival of a specific buyer who he begins chatting with. This buyer, a person, is known as the single mom, since he writes confession magazines, a lot of them presumably from the perspective of an single mom. The single mom and bartender begin speaking, and the single mom wagers a bottle of liquor if his story is sufficient to shock the bartender. The bartender agrees, and the single mom tells the bartender of his previous. The single mom explains that he was initially a woman and was taken into an orphanage on September 13, 1945, when she was left on the orphanage doorstep. She was named Jane by one of many staff on the orphanage. The single mom recounts occasions in his life when he was a woman, saying that he envied kids with mother and father and felt he was completely different by some means. He additionally states that he was fairly gifted and was superb in all scientific fields and was bodily robust, with the ability to battle boys. The single mom tells the bartender that she needed to hitch the house core to assist and repair astronauts in-house, as she needed to go to outer house herself and enlisted. Jane excelled in all of the exams set for her by the House Corps. However, she was disqualified in the course of the choice course as medical doctors discovered a medical anomaly throughout her bodily, revealing that Jane has an intersex situation. She has 2 units of intercourse organs, female and male. The medical doctors don't inform Jane this, nonetheless, and she or he tries to maneuver on together with her life. Jane ultimately goes to nighttime lessons in Cleveland to work on her demeanor and attraction, however by chance stumbles right into a stranger on her manor house on April 3, 1963. The two start speaking and shortly begin a relationship collectively. The single mom tells the bartender that the two fell in love and that she believed she had met the one who she really cared about. However, ultimately the stranger left Jane and by no means got here again. Emotionally distraught, Jane is approached by Mr. Robertson, considered one of many recruiting officers on the House Corps, who tells Jane that he truly works for a unique group that would use somebody together with her intelligence and bodily talents and affords her an opportunity to hitch. Jane is about to simply accept his proposition, however falls pregnant from when she was with the stranger. Jane ultimately offers beginning to a child woman. However, a C-section is required to efficiently take away the infant. One of many medical doctors who carried out the operation then tells Jane that in the course of the operation they needed to surgically take away her uterus and ovaries. However, since they discovered male intercourse organs intact, they surgically reconstructed Jane into a person. Jane's youngster is kidnapped by an unknown man. Jane is totally reconstructed into a person with additional operations. The single mom explains that as life went on, he grew to become an author and began writing confession tales beneath the pen title, The Single Mom. The single mom concludes the story and asks if he has earned the bottle of liquor. The bartender nearly offers him the bottle, however shortly reveals that he is aware of the single mom's new male title, which is John, and different particulars in Jane's life. John ultimately follows the bartender right into a safe basement beneath the bar. The bartender tells John that he truly works for Mr. Robertson, and that the group Mr. Robertson was referring to was the Temporal Bureau. The bartender then affords John the possibility to kill the person who ruined his life, with no repercussions so long as he agrees to be recruited into the Temporal Bureau afterwards. John accepts, and so they journey again in time to April 3, 1963, in Cleveland, Ohio. The bartender arms John with a gun to confront the person who seduced, impregnated, and deserted Jane, telling him precisely the place and when to seek out him. John is directed to Cleveland School. However, when he will get there, he by chance meets Jane, his youthful feminine self, whereas the bartender, temporal agent, appears to be like on from a distance and ultimately makes use of his time machine to journey into the longer term. The agent results in the very same constructing in New York at first of the movie, solely he arrives a couple of minutes sooner than his former self to seize the Fizzle Bomber. He spots the Fizzle Bomber and fights him, however is incapacitated within the ensuing battle. He then wakes to the sound of an explosion and gunfire and realizes that his former self, from the start of the film, has been injured and he wasn't in a position to seize the bomber. He's revealed to be the person who helps his former self attain his time machine as a way to get again to the Temporal Bureau in 1992. The temporal agent makes use of his time machine to journey again to March 1964, the place he meets with Robertson. The agent managed to seize some proof from the bomb utilized by the Fizzle Bomber and fingers it over to Robertson. It's proven that Robertson and the agent are literally having their dialogue within the hospital ward, the place Jane's youngster is born. The temporal agent, bartender, then kidnaps the kid and takes the infant woman again in time to the identical orphanage that Jane grew up in 1945. The temporal agent quickly returns to 1963 to retrieve John and divulges to him his mission and why he set John and Jane collectively. The temporal agent explains that he, John, Jane and the kid are all the identical person who exist by a predestined time paradox. He tells John that he wanted John to satisfy with Jane to ensure that her to develop into pregnant and provides beginning to a toddler who would ultimately develop as much as be them. If the temporal agent had not kidnapped the kid and transported her again to 1945, or if he had not arranged John and Jane, none of them would exist. John states that he does not need to go away Jane. However, the temporal agent insists it must be. The temporal agent takes the single mom, John, to the Temporal Bureau in 1985, to make sure his personal existence in order that he may stop the crimes to return, and is decommissioned. Robertson additionally offers the temporal agent a file containing new leads recovered from the proof he gave Robertson. The temporal agent, bartender, future John, then returns to his personal timeline to dwell out a traditional life as greatest he can in January 1975 New York. He then deactivates his time machine, but it surely encounters an error and doesn't deactivate correctly. The agent, future John, quickly deduces the place to seek out the bomber utilizing the leads given to him by Robertson. The agent ultimately finds the bomber in a laundromat retailer. To the agent's shock, he sees that the Fizzle Bomber is definitely him sooner or later. The Fizzle Bomber states that he saved extra lives than he has taken on account of his actions and that Robertson is setting them up. The Fizzle Bomber, seemingly insane, says that if the agent kills him, the agent will develop into him as it's a repetitive cycle. But when the agent loves him once more when he was Jane and John, then they will break the cycle. Disgusted along with his future self, the agent decides to kill the Fizzle Bomber. The film ends with the agent overlooking the time machine, stating that he is aware of for positive that Jane, John and himself have been one of the best issues which have occurred to him in his life and that he misses his previous selves dreadfully. Predestination is a 2014 Australian science fiction motion thriller movie written and directed by Michael and Peter Spierig. The movie stars Ethan Hawke, Sarah Snook, and Noah Taylor, and relies on the 1959 quick story, All You Zombies, by Robert A. Heinlein. Launch. Predestination's international premiere was held on 8 March 2014 on the South by Southwest Movie Competition in Austin, Texas, U.S. The movie was then chosen for the opening nighttime gala of the Melbourne Worldwide Movie Competition, MIF, Held on the Hamer Corridor venue on 31 July 2014 in Melbourne, Australia. The MIF promotional materials described Predestination as a distinctive mix of sci-fi, noir and crime fiction with a Bukowskian streak. The Sydney premiere of the movie, which additionally featured a Dwell Q&A session with the administrators, occurred on 6 August 2014 on the Palace Verona Cinema. The movie went on basic launch in the UK on 13 February 2015. Following the discharge of 2 trailers, and a 7-minute excerpt that was revealed on 3 December 2014, Predestination premiered on 9 January 2015 in America. On the subject of time journey tales, you at all times need to count on that sure parts with the storytelling will get wonky or just a little loopy. If one remembers Looper, it is typically simply tough to speak in regards to the topic. Effectively be making diagrams with straws was certainly one of Bruce Willis' strains. However, what occurs should you take the paradox of time journey, of going again to some extent in time whenever you noticed issues that you just knew earlier than even see yourself, and it turns into a pivotal level of departure to see what it means to be simply, one with the universe? Predestination is sort of probably the weirdest time journey film I've ever seen. It is deep down a well-made and crafted movie that includes certainly one of Ethan Hawke's probabilities as an actor to dig in deeply into the ethical molasses and questionable issues in relation to an individual residing a, to place it frivolously, sophisticated life. Or lives. Or is all of it one life? I may put the spoiler warning up, but when I went into spoilers with this story it will final like 10,000 phrases. Easy sufficient to say that this story begins off. After what appears to be a prologue, the place a personality will get burned, after which we'll get a face graft that makes the individual come again as Ethan Hawke's character. In 1970 the place a person comes right into a darkish bar at nighttime and Ethan Hawke is the bartender. This man tells this story and it begins off with the phrases, "After I was just a little woman." This piques Hawke's curiosity. This man is Defy. Nightly a Lady, performed by Sarah Snook. His story begins off with an orphan in 1945. A life with some additional power in childhood and adolescence. A sure anger is there too, beneath the straight a superb scholar floor. Then she, Jane, is chosen for a particular program that appears to contain house journey. It seems it is not, however that is one thing else. She's rejected as a result of a sure medical purpose. You might even see the place it is coming by the he-she factor. And the story goes on from there, involving a thriller man she meets, falls in love and has a toddler with. However, the man has already left and the infant is taken. Plenty of shady and heartbreaking issues on this lady's life. All main as much as a brand new a male persona, through surgical procedure and hormones, and writing, single lady, tales. However, the proposition is straightforward. Should you may return to satisfy that man who did you incorrect, would you kill him? Hawke poses this to Snook. She says completely, and away we go into time travel land. This primary half of the story was actually involving. At first I wasn't positive the place it was going. However, that is the important thing factor. You watch this story and the best way the Sparrow brother unfold each element. From a child woman discovered on an orphanage steps to changing into a male author with a pseudonym in Manhattan. It is wealthy with character growth, or not less than remark, as to how one will get from right here to there, and in the meantime Hawke's bartender watching and ready to spring a chunk of knowledge he has been hiding that he is aware of. I felt like I used to be within the fingers of stable, wealthy storytellers who have been relishing in telling a superb story, from Robert Heinlein, and Snook is absolutely astonishing right here in making this a deeply emotional being. If this primary third to half of the story was simply what it was, I would say it was a improbable quick dropped at full life, with the entire outsider psychology and how do I fit in character beats that make such a narrative so good. When it lastly involves the time journey story, Hawke reveals he is a particular agent for a company that has created time travel, or temporal issues. It is one thing like that, and that inside a 12 months time frame from when time journey's been invented, 1981. Hey, it is science fiction in spite of everything. An individual can journey, albeit with sure points. A few of these determine their manner into the plot, which additionally includes on the core, the form of, actiony, half. Which positive factors traction within the final third? The destruction by a bomb of a big part of Manhattan within the 1970s. If I had any fear going into the film, it was the story would go into generic motion film territory, or, like Daybreakers, the earlier movie from the brothers, would have an idea that was superior however not observed by within the runtime, and that is not the case. What it is, nonetheless, is completely, wholeheartedly bizarre and unusual. Why it's is exactly why I am unable to even start to enter spoilers. It includes the assembly in 1963 between Jane as a lady and his later journey again to that spot. However, I can say that the twist, or is it a reveal, genuinely floored me. It must be sufficient to take me out of the film. However, on the similar time it made me extra intrigued to see the place it will go from right here. By the top of Predestination I used to be left with extra questions than solutions, maybe, I'd say, how hardcore science fiction normally ought to do. Although it ends on a observe the place, it is actually unsure about the principal plot level, which feels as if the film is not performed when it's at the very least the ultimate scene, which does contain, I can say without spoiling a lot, 2 Ethan Hawkes on display screen from completely different time durations, and wildly assorted hair. It's massively entertaining and horribly dramatic, in a great way, and I feel a whole lot of the effectiveness previous the fully eccentric and warped considering of how these two characters work together within the story comes down not simply the sparrows however the actors themselves.